There. Hi, this is Frank Daves with Hanging Slice Partners. I'll be hosting today's webinar, the value of building your online community before you need it. Let me just make an adjustment here quickly. Presented by the Skeptical CMO and friends. Let's see if I can get our PowerPoint working here. Great. So just as a quick intro here to go through our agenda, I'm going to do a really brief introduction because I know you guys didn't come to hear me talk about the background of this particular group, but talk about really the topics today. And I put them under three headlines. That is brand, which Paige Arnaud-Fenn will be introducing, crises, which Bob Collins will introduce, and agility, which Rachel Hoppe will talk about. And then finally, at the end of the presentation, we'll get into a Q&A session. I'm expecting the main section of this presentation to last about 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end as it's going. So who is the Skeptical CMO? Well, it really came out of a conversation I had a while back at the South by Southwest show with Jeff Cutler when we were both talking about how many great conversations that we've been having about social media and all these new technologies. And the idea that I had was, why don't we put a crowdsourced effort together, try and get together some of the brightest minds that I knew in the area to have some regular conversations about it and share our learnings and also kind of test some of the conventional wisdom. I've had many questions about what's going on in the social and new media world, so why not bring some people together and try to come up with some answers? So this is a forum really where we can discuss, debate, and create. As a part of the conversation, obviously I'd like to invite you all to participate as well by submitting questions and participating on Twitter. So who's on the panel today? There's a group of 6 of us in total, but today I will be your host, along with Paige Arnaud-Fenn, the founder of Mavens and Moguls, Robert Collins, a.k.a. Bob, who's the producer of Social Media Breakfast here in Boston, and Rachel Hoppe of the Community Roundtable. And of course, behind the console today is Jeff Cutler. Say hi, Jeff.
Hi, guys.
You can hardly hear him. Well, I love that typewriter shot. Isn't that great? So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get rolling through this. The hashtag, for those of you guys on Twitter, we will be rolling on the hashtag of CMO. Feel free to pump some questions through there, Jeff. We'll be watching that on Twitter, and we'll be, again, answering some questions a little later on. And also, on the GoToWebinar console, you will see a questions box. Feel free to submit some questions there, and we'll be working through those at the end. Any questions that won't be answered on that, we will be answering after the session through our LinkedIn group. And finally, we will make the slides from this presentation as well as the recording and podcasts from this day will be available on the Skeptical CMO blog. So without further ado, why don't I open it up? And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Paige Arnaud-Fenn to discuss how important is engaging social media communities to my brand strategy.
Thanks, Frank. Great to be here. Frank, it's great to be here. Before I think we can talk about your social media brand, I think you really needed to take a step back and look at what your overarching business goals and objectives are, and that really drives your business strategy, which your marketing strategy falls out of, then your brand strategy. So you really need to go do the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting to get those ducks in a row. From your brand strategy, that's when you start developing your online brand, your offline brand, and of course your social media brand. Each of those pieces may play different roles in achieving your objectives and goals. The critical piece here is that they really need to sync up. You have to make sure that you are the same profile, the same personality, the same persona in each of those outlets. In the old days, you could get away with kind of parsing out your media plans and applying one message in one medium and a different message in a different medium. Today, you have to assume everything. There are a lot of examples of folks who are inconsistent in their branding line, offline, and through social media. So make sure that you've got the same profile and one persona. I think my overarching goal with social media branding is that I know there's a big push out there to get quantity of follow. Lots of following you, lots of friends, lots of connections, and at the end of the day, I'm much more than the we can talk at length about some examples of people who are doing it well and doing it right. But to manage your brand properly, I think you just need to make sure you've got a very strong reputation, the right mission, vision, values, and goals. So I'm going to wrap that up and turn it over to my esteemed colleagues and just throw it out there of, there are a lot of companies that have done, there are a lot of companies that have been doing social media now for a while. A lot of companies sitting on the sidelines wondering, when is it time to get in? What are the triggers? How do I know if I'm ready? So, Bob, Rachel, what do y'all think?
Back to the original question, which was asked, was how important is it? I mean, putting on my skeptical CMO hat here for a second and asking the question, what would happen if we don't do it? I mean, where does this all fit in, and how crucial is it? Rachel, you want to take a whack at that?
Well, one of the things that I think of, because I kind of come at this from a technology perspective, so I do look at the tools, and I have built social networking applications. This is where it links back to brand strategy and my question, which is there are different tools that allow you to have different qualities of relationships with different people. For example, it's asynchronous one-on-one. Phone is synchronous one-on-one with more meaning because you have the voice. And now there's this explosion of tools. Have companies gone back and done a relationship strategy along with their brand strategy and said, okay, which relationships are really critical to me, and therefore I'm going to apply different tools or different techniques to that population of people, whether they're partners or customers or whatever, and how does that link to my brand strategy? That's something that I still don't see a lot of, but I'm not on the brand strategy side of the house. Is that happening today?
Yeah, I think people are too focused on the tools and not on the strategy piece, and each of the tools can play an important role in business goals, but at the end of the day, it's really not about the tools. I think it's about the quality of those relationships.
But my question is, are people mapping out which relationships and what quality, what type of relationships they need with whom? Because really that is where the tools will fall out. But I haven't seen from the tool end of things people coming to me and saying, okay, this is a segment of customers where I need a super close relationship with, and so I'm going to have a community just for that segment of customers. This other segment is kind of looser. I'm going to use Twitter there. This other segment is whatever. I don't hear a lot of people saying that.
Actually, this is Bob breakfast here in Boston. One of the elements I'm interested in with regards to the different elements with regards to, if you just look at customer service from a standpoint. It used to be a look for the 1-800 have on your website. Use the old analogy.
Getting closer.
Look at Comcast. There's an organization that had such bad customer service that they engage on Twitter. Now here's the challenge. They're doing really, really well with regards to being responsive in a public fashion with regards to what's happening on Twitter and maybe on online, but they haven't caught up with actually their brand being responsive to the old traditional guards as well. So when you engage in one way of communicating and engaging with your customers across that's essential to your brand, you have to make sure all those engagements kind of a core are being given the right amount of support across the board. You can't all of a sudden be really responsive on Twitter and then not be when people are calling online as responsive in order to keep that same brand promise. And this kind of goes back to the overall aspect of actually is important for that community to engage their brand in an online fashion. And this is something we were talking about earlier, Paige, which is your customers are online. They're trying to engage with you. They're talking about your brand. They're talking about your services. They're talking about your products and in your market. And they want to be listening. They're talking about you. You have an opportunity to either engage with them or not engage with them. And the more the more time that goes by that you're not actually being responsive to them or using some of these new tools to just broadcast your message, but not actually engaging and listening to them and responding to them and pointing to information that might be helpful to, or acknowledging something interesting that they've done, or addressing a problem that they've had, then you're missing a major, major opportunity. Not even just an opportunity, it's becoming potentially very detrimental to your brand.
What I've done and what I've helped clients do is go on a listening tour. This is Paige, and I will tell you, it's enlightening to listen to what's relevant. How do your customers consume data and consume media? Some people like to read it, some people like to listen to it, some people like to type it, and you need to know where your customers are, and that's how you need to talk to them and engage them. And it's going to be different tools and different strategies for different people, back to Rachel's point.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks, Paige. The question I have for people right now as we start to shift to the next section of this conversation is, putting on my skeptical CMO hat, is asking the question again, what happens if you don't do something? What are the potential consequences? And as we kind of roll to question number 2 of this presentation is, can nurturing my online community, be a preventative measure? How can it help you going forward in avoiding any of the big meltdowns that could potentially happen out in your market?
Thanks, Frank. It's interesting. Just in the past couple months alone, there have been nothing but amazing examples with regards to the new way of handling crisis communications in an online world in the age of YouTube and Twitter. Do you remember the day when you actually could put out, you had bad news and you wanted to bury it, and you put it on the back of the week? It went out on let's put it on Friday after 3 o'clock, and no one will be able to talk about it. Maybe some interesting sports highlights will happen out over the weekend, and it won't be the headline news because the reporters won't be around to cover it. Well, let's take a look what happened with Motrin back in the fall. They aired out their kind of new controversial, pseudo-controversial online ad, or ad out there. They're talking about comparing wearing your baby in kind of a Baby Bjorn type thing was actually kind of a fashionable statement, and actually in the Motrin to be able to help you with that. Well, that started to get some play within the Twitter community, and particularly the mommy blogs. And they were all kind of feverishly feeding upon one another, taking offense to it. And where was this entire conversation was blasting out on Friday afternoon. And no part during any of this was any response back from Motrin or their parent company or anything. And there was no even listening that we know that this was happening. They had no type of infrastructure set up to actually respond to it. Companies now today need to be actually really listening and engaging with what's happening to their brand online 24 hours a day. Just as you used to have somebody on at the front desk used to leave when someone came back, went for lunch break, you need to have that type of listening and engagement online to be monitoring your tools. Same thing happened with regards to the Domino's crisis when that appeared, with the viral video came out with the 2 people down in the back of Domino's doing inappropriate things and behind the back of Domino's, and actually that blasted all over the place. And how quickly did Domino's respond was a very, very important factor to their brand. So I open it up to this community here with regards to what are the important elements that have changed with regards to in crisis communications handling right now, and building your brand out in your community to help you before that happens.
This is Paige, and I'll tell you, you used to have days, maybe a week, to get your ducks in a row and respond. Now you're lucky if you have hours. Your reputation is being monitored every single minute, and if you're not, whether what people are saying in the blogosphere and on Twitter are right or wrong, you have to respond and protect your brand. We have a client who sent out some materials to the press, and the reporter that picked it up with one of the major weekly publications wondered, is this company for real? And basically went onto Twitter. Does anyone know about this company? And if so, what do you think? It's just smoke and mirrors. And this was the reporter that was doing the article that could have ended up being a really terrible article for our client. And luckily, they do have somebody on monitoring the dashboard, if you will. and he's the online community manager, and made audience. He had made his friends before he needed them, as Frank had said. You've got to keep this community alive and engaged. And he put the word out to his community and said, we've got a reporter from Major Weekly that wants to do a story, and he wants to know if we're for real. What do y'all think? And they rose to the challenge, jumped in, and started tweeting about what an awesome business this was, great brand. And, they wrote the story, basically. And the reporter was overwhelmed with the good news, and they were on message. They had the talking points. It wasn't the chief marketing officer. It wasn't the PR. Not the hired guns. It was their actual customers who vote with their wallets and pocketbooks every single day telling the story. And that ended up being a terrific media hit for them.
Yeah, this is Rachel Hoppy.
I always, the last few months I've been looking back at the ranger station fire that Ron Clough did around a Scott Monty case study at Ford, where a fan site was selling unlicensed material. Got a cease and desist letter from Ford's legal team, and he energized his base and was really angry because he was a small business person that was going to shut down his business, and he got a very unfriendly, not even a call, saying you have to shut down your business. Scott really got on top of it very quickly, and unlike Domino's that had 400 people following them on Twitter when their whole problem broke, he had something like 20,000 people following him on Twitter, all fans of Ford, and he kept them up to date about what was going on, didn't make any false promises, and was also senior enough that he could actually get the answers and solve the problem immediately. And he reached out to everyone, called the owner of this fan website himself, and really smoothed the way. That whole action transpired over 24 hours. It never reached mainstream media. And you don't hear that much about it because it was handled very, very successfully. And Scott had his army before he needed it. And really, when I talk about building a network, I talk about amortizing the cost of building these issues networks that you face in a year. You can probably go back and benchmark of how many people experience years and kind of understand what the power of having that proactive network might be.
I guess that goes back to the old saying, don't go let a good crisis, go unutilized. Once again, there's so many proverbs out there with regards to crises meaning opportunity, and it's whether or not you actually have that community already in place so you can actually engage and try to address. It's not the problem sometimes as much as it is how you fix and address and take responsibility and ownership for that problem many times. But also with regards to community, there's a great case study with regards to a company. They're a scrapbooking company called Fiskator. And this is an amazing community which scrapbooking is huge throughout the country and actually throughout the globe. This is a company that kind of went out and kind of helped build this community to provide supplies and forms and online for them to kind of go out and build scrapbooking. Well, there was a big crisis that kind of happened. Someone had a major complaint with regards to some of their products. And even before the company could officially respond, go through all their channels with regards to what do we want to say, how do we respond, their community of over 30,000 members jumped on board, jumped all over this group of people who were complaining about it, and then said, this is how great this organization is. This is what it's allowing us to do. A fantastic opportunity to kind of really look at why that's so important to have that fan base, because that rabid fan base will really support you in the time of need.
Frank, you up?
Sorry, here we're just trying to make the smooth handoff of audio here. Great. Well, thanks, Bob. I know that the great scrapbooking crises have really
been diverted.
Exactly, have really been diverted and have saved civilization from death and devastation.
Air traffic controllers stopped the plane from crashing.
Exactly. So what I wanted to do now is segue over to the last question that we have today, which Rachel will kick off for us, and that's really talking about how will these new approaches make my organization more agile, and in what ways will that be? So Rachel, you want to kick it in from here?
Yeah, and this gets a little bit to the skeptical CEO fact, which is there are some great metrics around what community will do for your brand. If you look at the eBay example here, for example, community users spend 54% more time on the site, and community users remain customers 50% longer from the AT&T study. But the flip side of that is it a chicken or an egg problem? Are your most ardent customers also those people that are likely to be part of your community? And does this matter? Because if you look at the surveys of community managers, only 22% of them say they could really articulate the ROI of their community efforts. So what does this all mean? And does it matter in the end? Because the problem you have now online is that your vocal minority has a lot of power, and if they want to chat online, you should be chatting with them, and you better want to make sure that they're a positive vocal minority, not a negative vocal minority. And so you're having customers is not enough, and when I think about this, I think about network theory and who's in your village. Is it 100,000 people that are okay with your product, they've bought it, but they don't have much to say about it? Or is it 10,000 people who rave about your product? And I think we're getting into an age where it's better to have the 10,000 people who will rave about your product than 100,000 people who will give you money for it but not talk about it. And certainly better than having 10,000 people who will buy your product and not like it at all. And so your validation of new customers has to be much more intense than it once was. Not only do they have to have the budget, not only do they have to have need, but you've got to know that you can satisfy them happily, because they're more and more likely to be talking about it online. In communities that you may not see, there's a lot of private communities out there where people talk peer-to-peer. So my whole point is build that network before you need it. Make sure it's a robust, not a fragmented network, and make sure a fairly large percentage of your customer base is willing to speak positively on your behalf, and you treat them like a marketing channel as well as a customer base.
Bob Collins. One of those elements I continually hear with regards to kind of community building is kind of like expanding your brand, building your community, creating those advocates to become passionate fans about your community. But one important element that people tend to forget about is this community can very well become an amazing lead generation. They can actually buy products, goods, and services and share them with their friends and say, this is where I got it. So many of the times when you actually are building a community, think of ways that you can actually make it easy for them to actually maybe share that product with somebody or readily purchase it or purchase it themselves.
You don't sell yourself. One of the things that I'm most impressed by is SAP is really trying to get into the mid-market in their markets, and they're building communities to do that. And they're creating a marketing and sales channel for these partners of theirs that doesn't really help them from a revenue perspective in the end, meaning their small systems integrators are now finding sales partners to go after bids that they couldn't do on their own because they find partners in the community that SAP sponsors. Well, that makes SAP a really critical part of the fabric of that ecosystem, but not part of that particular conversation. That's a really smart, long-term, sustainable position for them because they're a market maker now. And those people are going to remain affiliated with the SAP brand because their business is predicated on being part of that community. And so think of ways you can reach out and create those networks that sustain your business in the long term, and it's not just the short-term transaction that you're trying to get to.
This is Paige, and I guess the new way of selling today is not really selling. It's being that trusted voice, that advisor, so that people go to you first. You become the filter. We all have those friends who are like the tech gurus. You go to them before you buy any new equipment. they know everything. Who are the 7 people that really are worth following? I think one of the most I read about was the woman that heads up theme parks at Disney. She launched the Harry Potter theme park with 7 bloggers. They were the 7 definitive Harry Potter go-to resources in the blogosphere. She did a midnight chat with those guys online, and that launched the Harry Potter theme park news. And 350 million people had heard about it by the end of that week, literally in a matter of days. It's those 7 people got her the audience. It wasn't about boiling the ocean. She knew the 7 right people to talk to.
I thought was really interesting about the sports, the kids in sports.
Of the Sports Museum Board at the Boston Garden, and we're going to be doing a lot of things around youth sports. And I had lunch today with a gentleman who runs the Boston Foundation, and we were chatting about, there are really 4 people in Boston to chat with youth sports, and those 4 people alone reach 100,000 kids in the Boston community. It's 4 people. So I don't need to set up, a Twitter account or follow these people, get a blog. Right, it's hard to find 100,000 kids, but if I can get these 4 guys, I can have the year of 100,000 children and get them involved with the sports museum. So that's again, it's a quality over quantity. Exactly, and we were joking earlier today. A friend of mine just came back for a reunion, and they tried to get everybody to come back for a reunion. They set up accounts, Twitter accounts, and they had about 20% of their class register. Well, guess what? They picked up the phone, and it was people to people. You pick up the phone and tell your friends, I'm coming to reunion. I want to see you and you and you. And guess what? That got the registrations up immediately. So sometimes it is online and offline.
Great. Well, thanks, Paige. Well, what I'd like to do right now is, I thank everyone for that part of the session. What I'd like to start to take some questions. I know Jeff had just pointed out to me that there's a fail whale on Twitter right now, so we'll probably be a little bit limited on the questions we'll take through Twitter. I do see some questions coming through on the chat window, and why don't you give me a brief moment. If also you want to send some questions to the panelists specifically, that I put we're using the hashtag CMO again, and you'll see the Twitter names of people you want to bang out there if you want to. My apologies for any of the concerns around the volume. We were having some microphone difficulties at the beginning, which I believe we've set up at this point.
While Frank's going through the questions, there's an example that I wanted to use earlier of a brand that I think is doing a fantastic job. Dove, if you've seen the Dove campaign using real women in the campaign, they kind of really turned the head by saying that real women can be beautiful too, all body shapes, sizes. And that campaign was very successful for them. They had a print version and a television version. And what they did is they took the videos and put them on YouTube. They put them on their website, and it's really taken off. So they've taken traditional and figured out the right tools, the right channels to get the word out, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. So it doesn't have to be super high tech. Sometimes it's the simple, stupid stuff that works.
It's a lot of the HubSpot research that they've done, inbound marketing, which is have conversations that your customers care about, not necessarily about the product. And their research suggests that leads go down from a $250 a lead price to $45 a lead based on posting content that your customers care about, whether or not it's directly related to the product that you're buying.
Well, that kind of goes back to the element people talking about. Many organizations from a traditional standpoint were spending 5% of their time actually creating interesting content that might be of interest to their community or their customers. And they spend 95% kind of trying to influence the market with regards to this content, either through public relations or through traditional advertising or direct marketing or and direct sales. But what we're finding right now, from an inbound standpoint, is if they balance out creating more fresh, interesting, good, solid, content, and then keep those other elements, traditional aspects, going out there as well, it just really helps galvanize that community and increases the brand value and the social capital of the material and the community that you're building.
Well, and we were talking about this before the webinar, but it gets to the higher level points that I was making around the incredible drop in cost of content creation. To do a professional video, even 5 years ago, you probably needed around $40,000 just for the camera and editing equipment, and right now an HD flip is $300. So creating content is really remarkably cheap. And then the cost of communicating that content and allowing your customers to add to it can double the value of that content relatively quickly. So you can get far more for the same price point in terms of content creation than you could just a few years ago. And then add to that how many people are online. There's 6 billion people in the world. 1 billion of them are now online. And as of a month ago or so, 200 million of them are on Facebook. I'm sure that's more now. But that's 3% of the world's population is on Facebook telling you what they're interested in, who they are related to. That's an incredibly powerful thing. You can go find the people who have the problem that your product solves.
Great. Well, thanks, Rachel. Let me bang out a couple of the questions that have come in through. The first question is kind of a two-part question. The first part being any recommendations of software or services that can monitor Twitter and other social media. And the second is more, I guess it's more of a statement than a question. With resource constraints, it's often impossible to have someone monitor the blogosphere and social media. Anyone want to take a whack at that one? Technology, I'll send it on to Rachel and the technology end of the table.
I'll take a whack at this. Well, Twitter search is a basic one, but works really well. There's another one that I've been using from Yahoo called Sideline that I really like because it allows you to do multi-term save searches, and you can open it once a day, and you can see people talking about, you know, if you're Popeyes, you can look for biscuit, or they do that more time than I do for my needs because of my brand is not quite so immediate. There's more expensive tools like Techergy and Radian 6 that are very good. And Visible Technologies, and there's a new Japanese search engine, and if you, I'm just going to look here, it's Yauba, I think it's Y-U-A-B-A, that does a multi-content federated search, so you can see whether it's something's a PDF or a document or a real-time search or a web page. That I think is very useful too. So there's a lot of free tools that you can use out there. You just need to know they exist. Searching across the most commonly used social networks like Flickr and SlideShare. You also want to do on a more occasional basis just to see what's out there, but it's not quite as conversational as Twitter is or the blogosphere. And obviously Technorati will do a search of the blogosphere. Which gives me an email with a summary of all the mentions of any term that I want in my email inbox once a day, which is useful. Beep. I don't remember the name of the company, but we were just talking about this the other night at Girls in Tech, of a solder company that has something like 100 blogs and talks about every kind of soldering you can possibly imagine, which is a very niche topic, if you will. But to the people that solder things, it actually matters a great deal, because the type of metal that's being used and what you're connecting and what the use is and what the strength is, that all has a lot of, and I wish I could remember the name, but Karen Rubin at HubSpot was talking about it. I thought it was fascinating.
Make sure my microphone is actually on when I'm talking to people. Going back on a soapbox for a second, that in the B2B world, the case studies have been a little bit few and far between. I mean, there certainly are examples of people trying it and experimenting with it, but it seems like most of the higher profile examples in the social media world have been more on the B2C side. Not to say that businesses aren't out there trying and experimenting and trying to figure out where it fits, and don't have communities that are really strong and dedicated.
I think you don't hear it as much. For example, Don Lockelade at SolarWinds runs a community of thousands of people. That's a very effective means of marketing for them, but it doesn't get the play because most of us can't recognize the name SolarWinds. We don't know what they do. It's somewhat esoteric, so that doesn't get copied around quite as much because it's brand recognition. We don't about some of those examples.
You're going to do that again. You do that again, Bob. Sure.
Sorry, Bob was turned off. He's coming back.
Where we're just talking about basically about, when we're talking about the various social networks out there, people, a lot of the traditional standpoint, people are talking about Facebook, talking about YouTube, talking about Twitter. But the real unsung hero here is actually, in the B2B space, is LinkedIn. Probably the most underutilized, most effective networking tool for the B2B in the enterprise community that's hardly being used or as effectively as it possibly could be. And if you could either design a group within LinkedIn to bring people in, or if you really want to start off with it, let's say you're in the network management space, you could really follow those groups that are key to your industry and start answering the questions that they're posing within that group and sharing information they're doing out to that group. So engage with that community there, build up your brand, and then bring them over to your own community as well and expand your.
The company called Global Spec that started doing they Xerox parts catalogs for engineers and put them online, and they have they basically started as a parts search engine for engineers, and now they've built a whole community around that. And so if you're an industrial engineer or you're an electrical engineer, any type of engineer, I think they have hundreds of thousands of members of their communities now, and that's another niche example that's using social media very effectively, but you just don't hear about them because most of us aren't engineers.
The other unsung hero in social media. The other unsung hero in social media are really the nonprofits. I think when you look at like the American Red Cross, what they're doing with Twitter and Facebook, again, they've got these big communities, and before natural disasters, before the hurricanes and tornadoes, they're asking people, are you ready? Are you prepared? It's a very resourceful, scrappy, cheap, easy way to help them get their messages out. The American Cancer Society is doing a great job. I mean, every family in America, including my own, answer. And, to build your friend base through Facebook, really smart move for an organization like that. So I think the nonprofit community should not be overlooked as well.
Great. Well, thanks, Paige. I appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to wind things down. I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. And let me just open things up here. Sorry, my apologies. Just as thank everyone for joining. Thank our panelists, Bob Collins from Social Media Breakfast Boston, Paige Arnold-Fenn from Mavens and Moguls, and Rachel Hoppe from the Community Roundtable. If you're interested in following up on the conversation, do check out our blog. We will put, we have this as well as some podcasts will be available on that. Stay tuned for regular podcasts through the blog. And also the questions, there were a bunch of questions that came through both on Twitter and through the webinar software. We will drop those into our LinkedIn group for people to follow up on. Again, on behalf of everyone and our sponsor, PJ Advertising, we'd like to thank you for joining us today and have a great day.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, guys. Yep, thanks.
It's been fun.
Bye.